All right, so we're diving into this interview about Bulgarian-Macedonian relations.
Okay, sounds good.
We've got Dr. Konstantin Golev's perspective on the table. And he really doesn't hold back, does he?
Yeah, he's a straight shooter, that's for sure. But that's what makes him such a good resource for this.
True. He's a Bulgarian historian.
Right.
And he's been working on this, like, deep in the weeds of these issues for years.
Oh, yeah.
Even on that joint commission, trying to find common ground on their shared history.
Which, let's be honest, that sounds like trying to herd cats sometimes.
It's got to be like a diplomatic tightrope walk at the best of times.
Yeah.
And this interview, it's from a Bulgarian TV show.
Okay.
One that focuses on Balkan affairs specifically.
Right.
So, already there are layers to unpack there.
Absolutely. The context is really key here, Knowing that he's speaking to an audience in Bulgaria who are probably familiar with a lot of the background, it just helps us understand, where he's coming from and maybe pick up on any nuances in what he's saying.
For sure. So let's get into it then. The new Macedonian government, VMRO-DPMNE, right?
Right.
They campaigned on this whole EU membership thing.
Yeah, they made it a big part of their platform.
But Dr. Golev, he seems a little skeptical. Is it just him, or is there really something to this? Aren't they a game they're playing with the EU?
I think Golev is picking up on a disconnect, between what they're saying and what they're actually doing.
Go on.
Well, take that $500 million loan, for example.
The one from Hungary.
Yeah, that one. Now, on the surface, it seems, pretty standard. But when you dig a little deeper, you realize it's actually financed by China.
Interesting.
And that raises some eyebrows, right?
Definitely.
It's like Hungary is acting as a middleman, funneling Chinese money into Macedonia.
And Dr. Golev sees this as China making a power play.
Exactly. Especially with their Belt and Road initiative, they've been expanding their influence in the region.
Right. So we have this potential EU skepticism, but they're making all these promises about joining. And then you've got this undercurrent of anti-Bulgarian sentiment that Golev keeps mentioning.
Yeah, he talks about this lack of good political forces in Macedonia, which is a loaded statement, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But it seems like this feeling goes beyond just the current government, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's his point, I think. Remember, he's coming at this as a Bulgarian scholar. So when he says good, he's looking for those groups who are actively pushing back against that anti-Bulgarian sentiment, which he sees as being present across the Macedonian political spectrum, unfortunately.
So it's not just the new government we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I thought the previous party, SDSM, they were considered the pro-EU reformist option.
That was the general consensus, yeah.
So how does that fit in?
Well, Golev's argument is that even SDSM, despite being seen as pro-EU, they still played the anti-Bulgarian card when it suited them.
Really? Do you have an example?
He mentions former President Penderovsky and his stance on Goce Delchev.
Okay, and remind me who that is quickly.
Right, so Delchev's this historical figure, kind of a revolutionary, and he's claimed by both countries as their own. So Golev points out that depending on who Penderovsky was talking to, whether it was a Macedonian audience or an international one, he would shift his emphasis on Delchev's background.
So playing both sides.
Exactly. Golev sees that as classic political maneuvering, using a sensitive topic to drum up support.
That's wild. So even the supposed pro-EU groups were doing this.
Yeah.
How can there be any real progress, especially on the historical reconciliation front, if everyone is playing these games?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it makes you wonder if the West, particularly the EU, they were so focused on bringing Macedonia into the fold that they kind of downplayed this ingrained anti-Bulgarian sentiment, especially from SDSM.
Because they saw them as the best chance for integration.
Exactly. Golev hints that maybe the EU is starting to realize that their initial optimism might have been, a bit premature.
Interesting. So where does that leave Bulgaria in all of this? Stuck being the scapegoat while everyone else chases the EU dream.
Golev suggests a pretty unsettling possibility.
Uh-oh, what's that?
He thinks Bulgaria might become Macedonia's Kosovo.
Whoa, okay, now that's a heavy comparison. What makes him say that?
Well, he argues that VMRO-DPMNE, they could use Bulgaria's, let's say, insistence on historical accuracy, especially within that joint commission we talked about, as a way to deflect blame for their own lack of progress.
So they'd be saying, we can't move forward because Bulgaria is holding us back.
Exactly. Classic tactic of creating an external enemy, right? Unites people and distracts them from their problems.
Bold moves.
It is. And Golev even suggests that they could use this to justify becoming more authoritarian.
You're kidding.
Nope, by claiming that they need to protect Macedonia from Bulgaria's supposed intransigence.
Wow, that's a worrying thought. So what does this mean for actually resolving those historical disputes then, especially through the Joint Commission?
Well, Golev sees the recent changes in the commission's makeup. They replace some members with more hardline voices as a sign that things are about to get a lot more complicated.
So less about finding common ground and more about doubling down on their own narrative.
Seems like it. He brings up this open letter from the former commission members, the ones who were let go, basically. Instead of, reflecting on their internal disagreements or different perspectives, they blamed Bulgaria for their removal.
Wow, classic deflection. Every time we turn a corner in this story, there's another layer of political maneuvering.
It's like peeling an onion, but instead of tears, it's just layers of political intrigue.
And probably more tears, let's be honest.
Probably.
It's easy to get caught up in all this like high-level political stuff. But I'm curious, what does it all actually mean for people on the ground? Like everyday people in Bulgaria and Macedonia.
Right.
Are they buying into this whole, narrative of distrust and animosity, the one that Golev seems to be highlighting?
Yeah, that's a really important question because, while the politicians are busy with their maneuvering and power plays, it's the people who actually have to live with the consequences of these strained relationships.
Exactly.
And, Golev's analysis, it doesn't really touch on that human element, does it?
No, not really. It would be fascinating to hear directly from people on both sides to understand how this political climate is actually impacting their lives, their relationships, their hopes for the future.
Absolutely, because, true reconciliation, it can't just be some top-down agreement imposed by governments. It requires genuine people-to-people connections, understanding, empathy.
For sure. We keep coming back to this idea of Bulgaria being painted as the scapegoat. Do you really think VMRO-DPMNE can actually pull that off? Like, can they really make Bulgaria the villain in all of this?
It's a classic political tactic, right? Create an external enemy. It's a way to unite people, to distract them from their problems. Whether it works in the long run, that's a different story.
Right, because at some point, people are going to want to see actual improvements, not just empty promises and finger-pointing.
Exactly. If VMRO-DPMNE can't deliver on their promises, if they can't actually make life better for everyday Macedonians, then blaming Bulgaria is only going to get them so far.
Totally. It's a risky strategy, but I guess we've seen politicians take bigger gambles. Speaking of risks, Golev seemed especially worried about China's growing influence in the region.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people are keeping an eye on. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been steadily gaining ground in the Balkans, and Macedonia, with its location, its economic situation, it's kind of a prime target for that kind of investment.
And we know those investments, they often come with strings attached. We've seen China leverage its economic clout in other parts of the world to, get its way politically.
It's a subtle form of influence, but it's effective. It's not like they're necessarily dictating terms openly, but they offer these loans, they invest in infrastructure, they position themselves as this reliable partner, almost like a counterbalance to Western influence,
But that partnership, it comes at a cost, doesn't it?
Often, yes.
Whether it's supporting China's stance on Taiwan or overlooking human rights concerns.
Exactly, and that's the dilemma for countries like Macedonia. They need the investment, but they risk becoming beholden to a power, one that might not share their values or their long-term interests.
Right, it's a tough balancing act.
Yeah.
And it puts the EU in a tricky spot, too, because if they come across as too demanding or inflexible, it might just push countries like Macedonia further into China's arms.
It's a total tightrope walk. The EU needs to make it clear that partnership comes with certain expectations. Things like upholding democratic values, the rule of law. But they also need to offer a compelling alternative to Chinese investment, something that supports sustainable growth without compromising those values.
Right. Easier said than done, I imagine, especially with people like Orban in Hungary. He seems more than happy to cozy up to China.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely a complicating factor. His stance makes it a lot harder for the EU to present a united front and to effectively counter that Chinese influence. It even raises questions about where his allegiances truly lie,
For sure. It makes you wonder. Circling back to Golev's analysis, though, he paints a pretty pessimistic picture of the situation, doesn't he? Do you see any glimmers of hope? Like, are there any alternative paths that could lead to genuine progress?
Yeah, Golev's perspective is important, don't get me wrong. But it's just that, one perspective.
Right.
He's approaching this from a very specific angle, as a Bulgarian historian who's been deeply involved in these historical debates.
So his view might be colored by those experiences.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that we always need to be looking for multiple viewpoints, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we might find some, glimmers of hope.
Oh, okay, tell me more.
Just because Dr. Golev doesn't see any good political forces in Macedonia right now at this moment doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right. There could be other players.
Exactly.
People who aren't as visible.
You got it. There could be individuals, groups, movements, working behind the scenes, trying to build bridges, to find common ground.
People pushing for a different kind of future.
Yes. A future based on understanding, not on, resentment and historical baggage.
It's like those underground rivers.
Yeah.
You don't see them on the surface.
Yeah.
But they're there, shaping the landscape in their own way.
That's a great analogy. And I think it's our job, to try to seek out those voices, to listen to what they have to say, to support them, because ultimately the future of Bulgarian-Macedonian relations, heck, the future of the whole region, really, it hinges on being able to move beyond this blame game and embrace a more nuanced, a more empathetic understanding of their shared history.
That's a powerful message. And it feels like a good note to end on.
Absolutely.
Or a lot to action, even. Because even when things seem, kind of bleak, like in this situation, hope and change, they can come from the most unexpected places.
They really can.
Well, on that note, that wraps up another fascinating deep dive. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Keep exploring these issues, keep asking the tough questions, and never stop digging for those hidden truths, the ones that often lie just beneath the surface.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap on today's episode.